Today, we're talking about something super cool: animals in space. Yup, you heard it right. Animals that zoomed off our planet and into the great unknown. I'll share 10 incredible stories of furry and feathery friends who became cosmic travelers. But wait, before you go anywhere, I've got a mind-blowing question for you. Can plants grow in space? Stick around till the end to find out. Brave animals were like the very first astronauts, going on dangerous journeys into space before humans. Sadly, some of them didn't make it back, but which creatures have been to space, and how many? We all remember Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon in 1969. That was amazing, but there were many animals who helped us get there. And even more that helped scientists learn more about space travel. Let's find out about the cool animals that have been to space. Let's start one by one. Fruit flies. In 1947, scientists in America sent tiny fruit flies way up high into space. They wanted to see if space stuff would hurt future space travelers. They picked fruit flies because they're kind of like us. The flies blasted off in a big rocket left over from World War II. They zoomed up 68 miles, which is where space starts. Then, their little capsule parachuted back down to Earth safely. When the scientists opened the capsule, guess what? The flies were all happy and healthy. This was the first time any living thing went to space, and it paved the way for many more space creature adventures. Monkeys and apes. Believe it or not, 32 monkeys and apes have traveled to space. This includes different monkey breeds like rhesus, pig-tailed, and squirrel monkeys, along with chimpanzees. The very first space monkey was a rhesus macaque named Albert II. He blasted off in 1949 and reached a super high altitude of 134 kilometers. Sadly, his parachute didn't work when coming back to Earth, and he didn't survive. There was another monkey named Albert I who tried a year before, but something terrible happened. He couldn't breathe because his capsule was too small, even before launching. The first chimpanzee to go to space was named Ham. NASA launched him in 1961, and lucky for Ham, he made it back to Earth safely and lived a long life until 1983. Mice. Those little mice. Scientists have been using them for ages to learn how space travel messes with our bodies. Just recently, NASA studied mice living on the International Space Station and found they adjust to floating around pretty quickly. The first spacefaring mouse blasted off in 1950. But unlike some lucky fruit flies, it didn't survive. The rocket crashed because its parachute didn't open. Dogs. Back in the days of the Soviet Union, they sent lots of dogs to space. The most famous one was a stray dog named Leica. They found her wandering the streets of Moscow and thought she'd be a good choice because she was friendly. They also figured a stray would be tougher and handle the trip better. Leica was special because she was the first animal to ever travel all the way around Earth in a spaceship, but it was a one-way trip. They only gave her enough food for one day and air for a week. The Soviet Union said she lived for a whole week, but the truth is, she got too hot and died after only 5 hours. Tortoises. Forget slow and steady. Back in 1968, the USA and Russia were in a big competition to see who could be the first to send a person to the moon. Russia launched a spaceship called Zond 5. Inside, they packed some dirt, seeds, some tiny worms, and, to special passengers, tortoises. These tortoises traveled all the way around the moon and came back to Earth after a whole week. They were supposed to land back in Russia, but the spaceship ended up in the ocean instead. Luckily, the tortoises were okay, even though they got a bit thinner during their trip. Frogs. Since way back in 1959, frogs have been taking part in space missions to help us humans explore space better. But the most important froggy flight happened in 1970. NASA sent a special spaceship called the Orbiting Froggy or Balance Thingy into space with 2 bullfrogs on board. They wanted to see how space travel made the frogs feel, kind of like motion sickness you get in a car. They put tiny sensors on the frogs' chests and ears to track what was happening. After 6 days in space, the frogs seemed to get used to it all, and their balance went back to normal. Spiders. After astronauts landed on the moon in 1969, scientists sent fewer animals to space. But they still wanted to know how space travel affected living things. In 1973, a clever high school student named Judith Miles came up with an idea to see if spiders could spin webs in space. They sent two spiders, Anita and Arabella, on a space trip. The spiders were able to spin webs, but they were a bit thinner than the ones they make on Earth. This experiment taught scientists a lot about how floating in space affects how animals move. Fish. Tiny fish called mamacogs, along with their eggs, were the first space travelers in 1973. Scientists wanted to see how these fish, used to swimming freely, would behave in zero gravity. Just like the astronauts who got sick, the fish swam in circles at first. But after a few days, both the astronauts and the fish figured things out and got used to space. Fast forward to 2012, and Japanese scientists sent another kind of fish, Medaka, on a space trip. Their fancy fish tank had machines to feed them, keep the water clean, and even had special lights to make day and night for the fish. These see-through Medaka fish helped scientists learn about how space travel affects bones, muscles, and radiation. Tardigrades. Tiny water creatures called tardigrades are super tough. In 2007, they became the first animals to ever survive a trip to space. These little guys can handle just about anything on Earth, like no air, super cold temperatures, and even drying out completely. For this space trip, the scientists dried out the tardigrades first. Then, they put them outside a rocket in space for a whole 10 days. When they brought them back to Earth and gave them some water, guess what? Over half, around 68% of the tardigrades were still alive, even after surviving the freezing cold and strong radiation in space. Nematodes. A spaceship called Columbia broke apart in 2003 when it came back to Earth. Sadly, all 7 astronauts on board died. The spaceship was carrying experiments to learn about science in space, and amazingly, scientists found a bunch of tiny worms called nematodes that were still alive even after the crash. These tough worms are sometimes used to see how space travel affects living things. Now, let's talk about our most important question. Can any plants be grown in space? In space travel, scientists like to study a tiny flowering plant called thale cress. It's kind of like the space research champion. This plant is special because it grows from seed to flower in just 40 days, making it perfect for quick experiments. Thale cress even holds a record for being the first plant to ever flower in space, way back in 1982. Scientists are still using this tough plant on the International Space Station to figure out things like which kind of light helps plants grow best in space and which plants can survive long trips in spaceships. Plants on Earth use gravity to grow strong, but there's barely any gravity in space. So, scientists are trying to understand how this lack of gravity affects plants. They grow thale cress and other plants, like lettuce and broccoli, in special rooms where they can control everything from light to water to see how the plants react. They even use machines that spin really fast to create a tiny bit of gravity, just like on Earth, and see how the plants respond to that too. So, that's all about how tiny plants like thale cress are helping us learn about space gardening and animals that went to space. If you found this video interesting and learned something new, please hit that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel. In the comments below, let me know what other space mysteries you'd like to explore next.
Subscribe to my channel.